Okay, in this video, what I'm going to do is show you how to combine some basic shapes. So we're going to start by making two boxes. In this first box, I'm going to make it basically a cube, all sides basically the same size. I like to think of it that way because I want to be deliberate about the shapes that I'm making. This next shape, I want to make one that's taller. And with these two boxes, we're going to end up turning one of them into a square tubing and the other into a box with a hole in it and a button on the top. These are just kind of arbitrary shapes, but they're ways of getting started with learning how to combine some shapes. So here, of course, we have lines that have been turned into boxes. Now what we want to do is take this box on the left, and we want to round off the corners that are on that face. So I'm going to start with some construction lines here, and these construction lines are going to allow me to think about how I would put a curve on this face. Now I want those curves to be tangent to the lines meeting at the construction line that I drew lightly there. Here I'll draw some more construction lines, and this is so that I can put the curve here at the bottom. Now, sometimes just to get it right, I've really got to think about how the box is completed even where I can't see it. But here I'm putting now the little round that's going to be in that area. My construction line's helping me get my rounds to be basically the same size everywhere. Now, when it's in a perspective view like this, the rounds don't look like they're the same size, but if I've used good construction lines, it will end up looking correct at the end. So this is a great time to really think in terms of sketching relative to what kind of skills it takes to sketch. I think that it takes actually a lot of geometric skills, not as much art, but a lot of understanding of geometry. Getting lines to be parallel, getting lines to be tangent, knowing where they should intersect, and things like this. So what I'm going to do now is take these rounds that I put on this one face and kind of extend them to the back. And between these 2 points where we have a tangency, that's where we would have a kind of a, I don't know what you would call this, like a tangent line that kind of appears. And then here, this bottom corner, where it comes off the corner, that's where the line's kind of gonna go all the way over to the edge, which I've drawn. And the same thing's going on here at the top. And I'm gonna round off that corner just a little bit so I don't get a straight or a corner. So now I have a box that has a rounded face and a rounded back. So let's turn this into a tubing, such as like a steel square tubing or an aluminum tube or something like that. Here I'm going to stick some parallel lines next to the existing walls. I'm trying to be constant in kind of the wall thickness everywhere there. And I've importantly made this smaller than the radius so that I could have an inside radius here. And I'm trying to make sure that I have a constant wall thickness even around those corners. That's what's going on here. All right, so the whole time I'm doing this, I'm thinking about what the geometry should be doing. Should these lines be parallel? If I have a radius inside of another radius, they're not the same size. The inside radius has gotten smaller by the thickness amount. And I'm thinking about those kinds of things while I'm drawing it. So now we basically have a shape where the front has gotten rounded off on all sides. And we can do a few more things here. Like, for example, I can do a little bit of shading to make it clear that this is hollow. And I always like when I have rounded surfaces that I'm shading to put more lines than when I have flat surfaces. I think that's what it would actually look like. So that's why I like to do that. Now I'm going to take my extra fine tip Sharpie and just go right around the edge. And I like to do that to make the part that I drew become more prominent on the page. And it makes the construction lines kind of fade into the background a little bit more when I do that. I just go around the outside here. This is a common technique that's used to just kind of re-emphasize the basic shape. Okay, so there's our box that's been turned into basically square tubing. So let's try to put a shadow on here. I always like to try putting shadows because it forces me to think about what might be happening with the geometry. All right, I can kind of tell as I'm putting this one on, I'm not terribly happy with this, but I do think that it would be something like this, where I've got these lines that are kind of parallel and a little bit rounded off in some of those top corners since I rounded off my beam. Excuse me, my tubing. Now I'm just going to hatch. When I'm hatching, I'm trying to get all the way to the shadow line and then to the product line and not leave any gaps in there. All right, so I'm not in love with that shadow, but I think that it's just all we have time for. All right, so now we're going to move on to this other box. And in this box, we want to round off this corner and this corner and this corner. And that's not easy to do. So we're going to need a couple of construction lines so that we get that corner right there to look just right. So adding in some construction lines now. It's a little messy, but my pen's a little bit funny right now. But anyway, I'm putting on some more construction lines here. Now in this corner, if I round it off, it's going to look like this. And this other corner will look like this, and those are the easiest corners to start with. So that's the one I started with. The one in the middle is quite hard. So this corner down here will also be rounded off easily. Now, what's going on is that in this area right here, I should have a curve that looks just like the one underneath it, for the most part. Okay, they should line up on the sides like this. And that's going to define a rounded corner in the front. Now, same kind of thing can happen here. So in this area, I want to draw a curve that looks like the one on the left. Yeah, and then I want to take that one on the right and put it right here. And they all converge into this kind of like rounded triangle thing in the front. And that's how we start to make it clear that we've rounded off all of the corners of the part. So here's these kind of lines that represent the tangencies of the face and the curve. And I don't know if that's what you would call that, but that's what I'm calling that right now. Then I'm going to do the same thing here in the back, just kind of round off a few of those corners just to get rid of the corners there. But it was these front ones that we're looking at. They're really the most complicated to try to do. Now I'm going to do the same thing in the back. Need to just round off that little sharp corner that's right there. And now I have a box that's rounded everywhere except the bottom. I didn't round the bottom face. Okay, so now let's try to combine some more shapes, and let's stick a circle in the front. Now to stick a circle in the front, I want to make sure I have a sense for where I want that circle to go, and I'm going to try to put that circle basically in the middle. So I'm drawing some construction lines on where the center of the circle would be. Now, if there were an axis coming out of my circle, it's going to be in line with all of the other lines that are going in that direction, just like that. So now that represents where the minor axis of the ellipse will be. So I'm going to draw an ellipse on here now, where the minor axis is right in line with the axis. And then what I'm trying to do here when I'm doing this, I'm trying to make sure this distance is the same as this distance, and this distance is the same as this distance. That's kind of centered my circle on that face. And there you can see I have a circle that looks generally kind of like a circle. So now I want to shade this so that it makes it look like it's going inside. And there we go. There's a circle on that face, and that's what it would look like basically. All right, let's put a switch or a button on the top, a circular button. So let me get the center of where I want that button to go. So I'm drawing these kind of coordinate system, kind of, these construction lines. And then I'm thinking about where the axis would be out of this button, and it's straight up out of the page, so it's like all the other vertical lines on the page. And now I'm going to do the same thing. My ellipse minor axis is going to go through, it's going to be in line with that axis that we drew. Okay, I'm trying to line up these sides so that it's basically centered. Okay, and that's what that circle would look like on that face. Now, if we want to turn this into a button and make it look like a dome, let's pay close attention to these construction lines that we drew. And from one side to the other, I can draw a dashed kind of arc. Okay, and that dashed arc is gonna make it look like there's a button that's coming up, and that it looks like a kind of a spherical head, just like that. Now we can press that button, and we're in pretty good shape. So what do we want to do now? I want to see if I can get the shadow to work on this one. I'm going to go the same angle as the other one, and try to attempt to get this one. At this point, we won't have anything in our arsenal to really know if our shadow is right, but it could work for me to get a block and shine a light and see what the shadow looks like. That could work. I'm not going to do that now. Instead, I'm just going to hatch this, which of course is my practice of parallel lines again, and it gets so hard when these lines are long like this. I'm starting to curve a little bit there, which is not so good, but nevertheless I'm trying to stick with it, get constant width between them. And then I'm just going to clean this up with my extra fine tipped Sharpie, and that will be about it for this one. So I think one of the reasons why I like this exercise is that it really makes me think about what's going on with the geometry. What should be parallel? What, if I were to have a round in one spot of the product, how is it that it would extend over to the other edge? I use those construction lines to help me with that, and those construction lines need to be parallel to the corners. And here we go. So we've got these two things we did, this one that we turned into a channel, this one that we turned into a box, and with a hole in the front and a button at the top.